My fiancée demanded 40% of my salary 24 hours before our wedding, so I exposed her contract in front of 200 guests. And she never saw my revenge coming. I'm 28 years old. I work in tech. Well, I used to. I'll get to that. And I need to get this story off my chest because what happened a few months ago at my wedding, or I should say what was supposed to be my wedding, basically blew up my life into 1,000 pieces in front of like 200 people. And the worst part, or maybe the best part, I don't know, is that I caused that explosion myself. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I met Danielle about 3.5 years ago, because without that context, none of what happened later makes sense. I met Danielle at one of those friends of friends parties. You know, the kind where you don't know anyone, but you end up staying until 3 in the morning because you're having a good time. She worked in marketing. She was 23 at the time, and she was one of those people who light up a room when they walk in. Literally everyone would turn to look at her. We started talking that night about I don't know what. I think about Netflix shows or something that basic, and from there, everything just flowed. The first 6 months were incredible. Like that phase where everything is perfect and your partner has no flaws and you think it's going to be like that forever. We moved in together after a year, which my parents thought was too fast, but I was in love and convinced she was the one. The next 2 years were good. Not perfect, but good. We had our fights, of course, mostly about money, because I earned quite a bit more than her, and sometimes there was tension about who paid for what, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary for a couple living together. She wanted to go out to expensive restaurants more often, and I was more of a saver. That kind of thing. In retrospect, and this is something that eats at me even now, there were signs I should have seen, but I was too deep in the relationship to notice them. Like how she always made comments about how much I earned, or about her friends whose boyfriends gave them a certain amount of money monthly, or about how her dad always gave her mom money for her expenses. But I thought they were just casual conversations. You know what I mean? About 10 months ago, I proposed to her. We went to that Italian restaurant she loved. I had the ring in my pocket, sweating bullets all night, and when I finally got down on one knee, she started crying and said yes before I finished asking. It was perfect, or so I thought. We started planning the wedding immediately because she wanted to get married soon. She said we'd waited long enough, and at 26, she wanted to be a wife already. I agreed, honestly, so we set the date for 10 months later. Her family, especially her mom, Christine, got super involved in the planning. And when I say super involved, I mean she practically took control of everything. The venue, the food, the flowers, the guest list, that ended up being like double what we'd originally planned. My parents put in some money, but Danielle's parents insisted on covering most of it, which seemed generous at the time. But now I obviously understand it was part of a bigger plan. The week before the wedding was chaotic, as I guess it is for everyone. I had to close some projects at work before we left for our honeymoon. Danielle was hysterical about the final dress details. Families arriving from different cities, everything was organized chaos. The day before the wedding, a Friday, I took the day off to help with last-minute things. Danielle had left early for a spa day with her bridesmaids, something she'd been planning for months, so I was at the apartment packing for the honeymoon when there was a knock at the door. It was like 2 in the afternoon. I opened it, and it was Christine, Danielle's mom. She had a manila envelope in her hand, and a smile that I now remember as uncomfortable, but at the time, I didn't pay attention to. She told me Danielle had asked her to deliver some important papers I needed to sign before the wedding. Something about health insurance or I don't know what. I was in a hurry and told her sure, to leave them there, and I'd review them later, but she insisted I had to read them right then because she needed to take them back signed. Something in her tone seemed weird to me, but I opened the envelope, standing there at the door. It wasn't anything about health insurance. It was a contract, like 3 pages long, printed on formal paper with those seals that look official. I read it quickly at first without really understanding what I was seeing, and then I read it again more slowly because my brain wasn't processing what my eyes were reading. Basically, and I'm not exaggerating, it was a contract where I committed to giving Danielle 40% of my monthly salary. 40%. Not for household expenses or for a joint account. No. It was for her to use however she wanted, like some kind of allowance or her own salary. And if I refused to pay any month, the contract specified that, it would be considered financial abuse, and she could initiate a divorce where she'd be entitled to, I don't know how many more things. I stood there, I don't know how long, maybe 30 seconds, that felt like half an hour, reading and rereading this paper while Christine watched me with that now clearly nervous smile. Finally, I asked her what the hell this was, and she told me very calmly it was a prenuptial agreement Danielle had prepared to ensure her financial stability in the marriage. I told her that prenuptial agreements are discussed months in advance with lawyers present. They're not presented in an envelope the day before the wedding like a grocery list. Christine got defensive and told me Danielle had been working on this for weeks, but hadn't found the right moment to talk to me about it, and that since I earned much more than her, it was only fair. That this is how modern marriages work. I called Danielle immediately. She sent me straight to voicemail. I sent her like 5 messages saying I needed to talk to her urgently, that her mom was there with some papers that made no sense. Christine was still standing at the door, trying to convince me this was normal, that her friends had similar arrangements with their husbands, that I should be happy to be able to provide for my wife this way. I felt like my head was going to explode. I asked her to leave. I don't think I was very nice about it. I closed the door and sat on the couch trying to process what had just happened. Danielle called me back like an hour later. I'd already read the contract about 10 times, and each time I got angrier. I asked her what the hell was this shit her mom had brought me, and she, with a calmness that disturbed me, told me it was exactly what it appeared to be: an agreement to ensure she'd be financially comfortable in our marriage. I told her she was crazy if she thought I was going to sign something like this, especially presented this way less than 24 hours before the wedding. And then she said something that chilled my blood. She said, "If you don't sign it, there's no wedding tomorrow." She wasn't joking. I could hear it in her voice. That determination I knew well because I'd seen it when she wanted something and wouldn't accept no for an answer. I tried to reason with her. Told her that if she wanted a prenup, we could do it right, with lawyers, with time to review it, but that this was an absurd ultimatum. She cut me off and said we'd already spent too much money on the wedding, that 200 people were going to be there tomorrow, that our families were already in town, and that if I really loved her, this wouldn't be a problem. She was manipulating me, and I knew it, but in that moment I panicked, thinking about the scandal, if we canceled the wedding, disappointing everyone, the lost, money, everything. I told her I needed to think about it, and she said I had until 8 that night to decide that she was going to stay at the hotel with her, bridesmaids anyway, because it was bad luck to see each other before the wedding, but that if she didn't have the signed contract by 8, she wasn't going to show up at the church tomorrow. She hung up. I just sat there with this damn paper in my hands, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. You know that feeling when something you thought was solid suddenly reveals itself as completely false? That's how I felt. 3.5 years of a relationship, and I had no idea who the person I was going to marry really was. I called my best friend James, who was my best man. I told him everything, and he told me I was completely crazy if I signed that this was a red flag the size of a country and I should cancel the wedding. Then I called my dad. He was more measured. Told me he understood the panic, but that a marriage starting with this type of ultimatum wasn't going to end well. That this was just the beginning of something worse. My mom got on the phone and basically said the same thing but with more emotion. How could Danielle do this? She thought she knew her, but evidently didn't. I spent the next few hours in a state of shock, walking around the apartment, looking at the packed suitcases for the honeymoon, seeing our photos on the walls. At 7:30, I hadn't made a decision, and Christine called asking if I'd signed yet. I told her no, that this was insane. She got angry and started yelling at me that I was selfish, that her daughter deserved to be financially secure, that if I didn't love her enough to make this small sacrifice, then I didn't deserve to marry her. That really made me angry, and I told her this wasn't love, it was extortion, and that she could go to hell along with her contract. At 8 o'clock sharp, Danielle called me. I told her I wasn't going to sign it. There was a very long silence, and then she said, "Then I guess we're not seeing each other tomorrow." I begged her to reconsider, to please talk in person, that she couldn't be serious. She said she was completely serious, that if I didn't sign, she assumed I wasn't committed to the marriage, and there was no point in moving forward. The conversation got ugly. We started yelling at each other, her crying, saying, I didn't love her, and me telling her she didn't understand what love was if she thought this was acceptable. Eventually, she said she'd give me until tomorrow morning to change my mind, that she'd be at the hotel waiting for the signed contract before going to the church. She hung up again. I didn't sleep at all that night. Like at 3 in the morning, in that weird clarity that comes from extreme exhaustion, I had an idea. If she wanted to play dirty, I could too. I found the contract, read it one more time, and signed it. Yes, I signed it, but with a plan. I took photos of each page, made like 3 copies on the printer, and packed everything in my backpack along with my wedding suit. At 6 in the morning, I sent Christine a message saying I'd signed the contract and would deliver it at the church before the ceremony. The wedding day was surreal. I got ready like a robot, my best man trying to cheer me up, but I was on another planet mentally. We got to the church at like 11. The ceremony was at noon. The place was full of flowers. There were like 200 chairs set up, people starting to arrive. Everything looked beautiful. I met Christine before going in and gave her the signed contract. She reviewed it quickly, smiled satisfied, and left. I went straight to the priest who was going to officiate the ceremony, told him I needed to talk to him urgently, and explained in short version what had happened. I told him there was going to be a change in the vows, to trust me. He looked confused but agreed. The ceremony started. I was standing at the altar, probably looking more nervous than a normal groom should look. Danielle walked in with her dad. She looked absolutely beautiful in her white dress, and for a second I doubted what I was going to do. But then I remembered the contract, the manipulation, the ultimatum, and that doubt evaporated. She reached the altar. Her dad gave me her hand with a smile, and we stood in front of the priest. There were the typical readings, some songs, and then came the moment for the vows. The priest looked at me and said, "Cameron, do you take Danielle to be your wife?" I took a deep breath, pulled the copies of the contract from my inside pocket, and said loud and clear for everyone to hear, "Before I answer that question, there's something I need to share with everyone present." The murmuring in the church started immediately. Danielle was looking at me with huge eyes, her face going from confusion to horror in seconds. I raised the papers and said, "Yesterday, the day before our wedding, I received this contract from my fiancé's family." I started reading out loud, literally reading the clauses of the contract where it specified I had to give her 40% of my reins, monthly salary or face legal consequences. The church exploded in murmurs and gasps. Danielle's mom stood up yelling for me to shut up. Her dad stood up too. My mom had her hands over her face. My dad looked between proud and horrified. Danielle grabbed my arm trying to take the papers from me, but I pulled away. I kept reading the most scandalous parts of the contract while people reacted. When I finished, I said, "I was presented with this document 24 hours before the wedding and was told that if I didn't sign it, there was no marriage. So I signed it, but not because I agree, but because I wanted all of you to know exactly what kind of person the woman I'm supposed to make my wife is." Then I tore the contract into pieces in front of everyone. Danielle was crying hysterically, trying to explain something, but no one could hear her over the chaos. I looked at the priest and said, "To answer your question, no, I don't accept." I took off the microphone I had on, left it on the altar, and walked down the center aisle toward the exit while 200 people watched me. Some were clapping, others were yelling, others were just in shock. I left the church, got in my car, and went straight to my apartment. The next few hours were crazy. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls and messages. My mom crying, my dad saying we needed to talk, friends asking what had happened, some supporting me, and others saying I'd been too cruel doing it that way. Danielle's family sent me threatening messages, her dad saying I was a coward, Christine saying I'd ruined her daughter's life and she was going to sue me for something. I don't know exactly what. Danielle sent me like 50 messages, going from insulting me to begging me to talk to insulting me again. I didn't respond to any of them. I poured myself a whiskey, sat on the couch, still in my suit, and wondered if I'd done the right thing. My parents came over that night. I expected a fight, but my dad just hugged me. My mom too, though she was angry about how I'd handled things. They told me they understood why I did it, but that there were many other ways to resolve this, that didn't involve publicly humiliating Danielle in front of all the family and friends. I told them she had humiliated me first with her extortion, that if she didn't want public embarrassment, she shouldn't have put me in that position. We argued for a while, but eventually they understood my point of view, or at least said they did. They stayed with me that night because they didn't want to leave me alone. The next few days were horrible. I had to call my work to let them know that obviously I wasn't going to be on my honeymoon or back when I'd planned. My boss was understanding, but I could notice the discomfort in his voice. This was going to be office gossip for months. Danielle kept sending me messages that I didn't read, until finally I read them all at once, and it was an emotional roller coaster. Some said she loved me and she'd made a mistake. Others said I'd ruined her life, and she'd never forgive me. Others trying to justify the contract, saying she just wanted security. None was a real apology. A week after the wedding that never was, I came back to the apartment after staying with my parents and discovered Danielle had taken all her things. She didn't tell me, didn't leave a note, just took everything that was hers and some things that were technically mine too, like the TV we'd bought together. The apartment felt empty and strange, with spaces on the walls where there used to be pictures, the closet with half the clothes gone, the kitchen without half the dishes. I sat on the couch, which thankfully she left, and cried for the first time since all this happened. Not because I missed her, at least not yet, but because 3.5 years of my life had just evaporated in the most dramatic way possible. Like 3 weeks passed in this weird limbo where I tried to continue with my normal life, but nothing felt normal. Work was uncomfortable because everyone knew what had happened. Going out with friends was uncomfortable because half were friends of both of us and didn't know whose side to be on. Even going to the supermarket felt weird because I lived with the fear of running into Danielle or her family. And then, just when I thought the worst had passed, I received a certified letter from Danielle's parents. It was a lawsuit, not legal, technically, but threatening to make it legal, demanding that I reimburse them for all the money they'd spent on the wedding. They were talking about like $50,000 between the venue, food, flowers, dress, everything. I got so angry I went straight to their house. I knocked on the door and Danielle's dad opened. We yelled at each other in the doorway for like 10 minutes, him saying I'd canceled the wedding so I should pay. Me saying his daughter had sabotaged the wedding with her absurd contract, and if anyone owed money, it was them, for being part of that manipulation. Christine came out and also started yelling, saying I was a monster who had destroyed her daughter. I told them their daughter had destroyed herself with her greed, and they could sue me if they wanted, but I wasn't going to give them a cent. I left before things got physical, because her dad was getting too close to me, and I was about to lose control. That night, I called Danielle, for the first time since the wedding. I don't know why I did it. I guess I needed to hear her voice or understand something I wasn't quite processing. She answered after several rings. I told her her parents had sent me that letter, and she sighed and said she didn't know anything about it, that her parents were acting on their own. I asked her if she really thought that contract was reasonable, and there was a long silence. Finally, she said her friends had put the idea in her head, that she'd seen videos on the internet about women securing their financial future, I thought it was the smart thing to do. I told her the smart thing would have been to talk to me like adults months before, not ambush me the day before the wedding. She started crying and said she knew, that she'd made a horrible mistake, that if she could take it all back, she'd do it differently. I don't know if I believed her. Part of me wanted to believe her, but another part thought she was only sorry because her plan didn't work. I told her I needed her to tell her parents to stop harassing me, and she promised she'd talk to them. We hung up, and it was the last time I talked to her for months. I decided I needed a big change in my life. I couldn't keep going to the same job where everyone looked at me with pity or curiosity. I couldn't keep living in the same city with all the memories and the potential of running into Danielle at any moment. I talked to my dad about an idea I'd had for years, about starting my own tech consulting business. He offered to invest some money he had, saved, and I accepted. I quit my job, gave notice to the apartment owner that I was going to move, and started planning this new stage. My parents supported me completely. My mom especially excited to see me take control of my life this way. But the business started slow. But after a couple of months, I got my first clients. I wasn't making the same as at my previous job, but The freedom was worth it. I moved to a smaller apartment in a different area of the city, basically started from zero. I deleted all the photos of Danielle from my social media, put everything that reminded me of her in a box, tried to move forward. About 3 months after the canceled wedding, I went to a bar with James and other friends. We were drinking beer and catching up when I felt someone watching me. I turned around, and there was Danielle, at a table, on the other side of the bar with a group of girls. Our eyes met, and my stomach tightened. She looked different, thinner, with shorter hair, something in her face I hadn't seen before. Like sadness or maturity or I don't know. James noticed I saw her and asked if I wanted to leave, but I told him, no, I was fine. Like half an hour later, Danielle approached our table. My friends got tense, but she just looked at me and asked if we could talk outside. I hesitated, but finally accepted. We went outside and stood on the sidewalk, in that awkward silence that happens when two people who knew each other intimately become strangers. She spoke first, said she'd been wanting to contact me, but didn't know if I'd want to hear her. I told her it depended on what she wanted to say. Danielle told me she'd been in therapy these last few months, that she'd realized a lot of things about herself and about our relationship. She said the contract was a completely stupid and manipulative idea, that she did it out of insecurity and pressure from her mom and friends, but that wasn't an excuse. She said, what she regretted most wasn't losing the wedding but losing me, that she'd realized too late how good she'd had it. I just listened without saying anything. Then she asked if I could ever forgive her. Not to get back together, but just to have peace. I told her the truth, that I was still angry and hurt, that what she did shattered something in me that wasn't going to be repaired easily. But I also told her I understood that people make mistakes, and that with time, maybe I could forgive her, though that didn't mean forgetting. She nodded with tears in her eyes, thanked me for listening to her, and wished me the best with my business because apparently she'd heard about that. I returned the good wishes, and we said goodbye there on the sidewalk. No hug or handshake, just a goodbye. I went back to the bar feeling strange. Not sad exactly, but not relieved either, just kind of closed. James asked me if I was okay, and I told him, yes. That surprisingly I was, and it was true. That conversation somehow gave me some closure I didn't know I needed. It didn't change what happened or make the pain disappear, but it made me feel like I could finally start letting it go. Now, several months after all this, I'm okay. My business is growing. I have new clients every week. My relationship with my parents is better than ever. I went on a couple of dates, but nothing serious yet. And that's fine. I'm not in a hurry. Sometimes I still think about Danielle and what could have been if things had been different, if she'd been honest from the beginning, if I'd seen the red flags earlier. But in the end, I think I did the right thing. It was dramatic. Yes, it was public and probably humiliating for her. But it exposed a truth that needed to be exposed. I don't regret doing it, though maybe I regret how I did it. I guess I'll never know if there was a better way, but it was the only one I found in that moment, and now I have to live with that decision. And I can do it. Honestly, I can live with that.